Wednesday, PSW staff Kleins and friends joining us. Yesterday we looked at Bill Evans, part one. Let's go right into part two.
Okay, so let's talk about two songs in particular. Like we said, the first song is one of his greatest compositions, one of my favorite songs of all time, "Waltz for Debbie," and "Waltz for Debbie" was written for his niece that he was spending time with, who was 3 years old, Debbie. So that's Waltz for Debbie, one of his most famous compositions. Personally, one of my favorite songs of all time. So before we look at it, let's look at what he's doing harmonically. Okay, so Bill Evans, he sort of got rid of this functional harmony, and by that I mean he used chords for color and timbre rather than building chords by thirds. And so we'll look at this. And so his way of playing is like we talked about, very sensitive and introspective. So he's looking for colors rather than just playing block chords, because he's such a lyrical player. And so what he's doing is he's sort of, okay, so we know what a root is. A root is, we're playing this song in the key of C. We're going to play this song in the key of F. The root would be F. And if we're playing the song in C, the root would be C. So let's just take a C chord. C, E, G. That's a C chord, right? So he's omitting the root. Something that sounds so simple, but it's going to create a whole new color. So instead of C, E, G, in the left hand, let's just say he's going to play E, G, C. So that's an inversion. We call it an inversion where the root is not on the left hand. So it's not starting with a C. Even though it's a C chord, it's not starting with a C. It's starting with a third. So that's first inversion. We won't go too deep into this, but I just want to show you that a lot of his chord structures, chord playing, is that he's not playing. Usually when we sit down at the piano, if you tell me to play a C chord, I'm going to do C, E, G. Well, he's not going to start there. He's going to start with maybe E, G, C, or maybe G, C, E. He's going to start with something else. So automatically that creates a different sound, a different color. It's still a C chord, but it's a different color C chord. Now, this is nothing new at all in classical music. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. But like we said, he took a lot of classical elements and brought it into jazz. So in jazz music, it wasn't really like that yet. It is now, of course. But with Dixieland and swing and even bebop, they're using root chords a lot of the time. So if the chord changes are a C chord to an F chord, they're usually going to be playing a C root and an F root, the bass and piano, usually. With Bill Evans, he's getting rid of that. He's using influences like Debussy and Ravel, where they are based, for hundreds of years, classical musicians, composers have been using this structure. So that's nothing new, but it's new in the realm of jazz. And Bill Evans is bringing this into jazz in the 50s. So Bill Evans is revoicing the piano. Usually, even pianists like Bud Powell, they play the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth. He's revoicing all of these chords to get different colors. That's why it sounds... The sound of his chords is truly unique, and we hear that now, but again, in the 50s, people weren't playing with that kind of color. So if we look just even at the first measure of Waltz for Debbie, we see that it could be an A minor 7 chord, It could be an F major 7 with the third in the left hand, and that third of an F major would be the A. So he's starting with an A. So already there's some ambiguity there in the sense of it's not traditional, right? If you have an A minor 7, you're going to be playing, the A is going to be in the root in the left hand. Well, already, just from the first measure, there's some ambiguity. There's some, which is bringing a different color to it. And then if we look at like measure 5, he's starting in the left hand, this downward chromatic dissension, where it's, and that is hard to do where it's not going to sound dissonant. It's sounding consonant, but it's a way that Stravinsky was writing, where he would use chromaticism, and that's half tone by half tone by half step, and make it sound harmonically pleasing and not dissonant, not too dissonant, rather. Unusual, where it's like, wait, I've never heard that chord spelled that way, but it's working. So he's already using these classical elements, chromaticism from Stravinsky, with the G, the F sharp, the F natural, the E flat, the D flat. He's going down chromatically, but still sounding harmonically pleasing, still sounding consonant, still sounding beautiful. And a year later, after Waltz for Debbie, he comes out with another song composition, the second one we're going to be looking at, called Peace Piece. This is 1958, and here we really hear elements of classical music, particularly Chopin's Berceuse. Berceuse is a lullaby. Listen to Chopin for just a second. So Bill Evans is listening to this, and he's also listening to Leonard Bernstein's Some Other Time. Listen to Some Other Time for a second. Okay, now let's listen to Bill Evans' Peace Piece. They're pretty close. I mean, literally he was playing Some Other Time on that same record, but he wanted to just do another recording based on those chords, and it kind of turned into his own composition. And so here we hear the influence of Leonard Bernstein, who's a classical jazz composer, and Chopin, who's a classical composer, written 100 years before this. And what Bill Evans is doing, besides creating something really beautiful, he's using an ostinato, and that's a motif or phrase that's repeating. So in the left hand, he's repeating those same two chords, right? And and that's setting up kind of a rhythm. And ostinato, Steve Reich would be using this 20 years later with minimalism. Philip Glass, John Adams, Steve Reich, they would use ostinatos or ostinati in many times to create that simplistic rhythmic engine going on. Okay, so Bill Evans is doing that here. So as the left hand is doing these two, the right hand is playing this just serenely beautiful, all these melodies that are just bursting out, cascading. Miles Davis said his music sounded like, this cascading waterfalls. And there's trills and there's grace notes and there's all these ornamentations on the right hand where it's sounding so soothing and so like a lullaby almost. This is one of his most famous songs of all time, and he never played it except once before he died because he thought it was just kind of what he did in the studio was all he could say about it. And we'll end with a quote. He said, "Everything I've learned with feeling being the generating force." And isn't that what we try to do, especially us artists or people in the arts? If there's no feeling, then it's not worth it. If we're just going to be talking about high-minded ideas or low-minded ideas or any kind of, if it's devoid of feeling, then what's the point? As artists, we feel deeply about things, and we should. And if we don't, then usually maybe it means it either requires a further look into it, or simply that there's not much more to look at, so we should maybe refocus on something that gives us a feeling. I mean, as human beings, we need feeling to exist. Or we should. If we don't, that's okay. But that's not okay for me. That's not okay. It shouldn't be okay for you. Unless we're feeling something, then what's the point? Then we're just robots. We don't want to be that. We want to always feel something. And with Bill Evans' music, we're feeling something. Usually, at least we're feeling that he's feeling something. Even that's a feeling. Let's go with that. Let's just try it today. Try to make sure that everything you do, it's generated by feeling, and a feeling of positivity, of creativity, of rising above just the average, the norm, being, we've talked about being brilliant, being transcending things in a positive, in a creative, in a way that's very not mediocre, right? Remember we talked about Mozart. What's your oboe? That oboe that came in at the end of that, or not the end, but in the Grand Partita. That one instrument made the whole thing work, made the whole thing different, rather. We need to be generated by feelings. We are, but we need to keep that as the focus. Otherwise, life is just passing us by, right?
So we got more technical here. Hope you enjoyed that. But technical with inversions, right? Just not a hard word, respelling of a chord. That's what it is. This was new in jazz music, of course, going back to Debussy and before, of course, that inversions was nothing new. Classical music had been going on for hundreds of years, but in jazz, not too much until Bill Evans is like, oh wow, you can color a chord, you can color the hell out of a chord. Evans was one of the first to do this in jazz music, of course, and we look a lot with Waltz for Debbie, not only inversions but chromatic, the downward, like somebody like Stravinsky would do that, but Evans is doing that in jazz. So, and then with Chopin's Berceuse and the Peace, you really see that, and then you see his influence with Bernstein's with Some Other Time. And the ostinato. And the ostinato is going to become very important to Steve Reich and minimalism and Philip Glass. I mean, you see how all these musicians and different styles of music, it's all under the realm of music, but all these different people, just they're steal from each other. And I loved that, everything I've learned with the feeling as the generating force. We always talk about, what is this generating force of art and music and all that stuff? Feeling, right? If you're not feeling anything, then you're not doing it right, or something like that. So life's just passing us by. That's, to finish the quote. So we gotta be feeling through art. So I love Bill Evans, and that's a nice way to wrap him up, revisiting him. So tomorrow we're gonna look at a female pianist that influenced Bill Evans a lot. So that'll be fun. Okay, hope you enjoyed wrapping up Bill Evans part 1 and 2. Love you guys, and see you tomorrow. Okay, bye.